I spoke about this in my TEDx talk where on my way to Sundance, I called a ride share and I had this feeling in my heart that I shouldn't take it. I heard this message, you have plenty of time. Why are you calling a ride share car right now? And I just decided to take the car and not listen to that piece of information. But I also knew that I needed to ground. The moment I got in the car, I felt the driver was a little bit ungrounded. The energy didn't feel good to me. So I was closing my eyes and meditating, and we're on heading to SFO. And all of a sudden I hear my driver scream out, "Oh my God." And I open my eyes, I see that we are driving at 70 miles per hour into a 4-car pileup on the highway, barreling in. And it was intensely scary. The driver was out, the airbags came out, the whole car got smushed, and then another car came in. And so that was, for me, I almost risked my life not listening to my intuition.
Hello, darlings, and welcome to Not Over, Just Different. I'm Natalie Ledwell, and I'm here to share deeply insightful and vulnerable conversations with you from people who are willing to open up and share what their journey's been like so that you can learn and be inspired to take action in yours. It's never too late to begin again or to see a new perspective. No matter what your dreams or goals are, you'll find inspiration and community here. It's time to rediscover yourself, reignite your passions, and make the next 50 years even more full than the first. Have you been struggling to make a decision or know which direction to go in life, but wish you could tap into your intuition to get some guidance? Well then, if this is you, you're going to love today's podcast. My special guest is Yasmeen Turayhi. She is a good friend of mine. She has a master's certification in intuition medicine, and she runs an intuition school, which is called the Inner Knowing School for executives and creatives. So tune in, listen to how you can tune into your intuition to be able to figure out the guidance that you need to move forward in life. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the podcast for this week. This week, I have my amazing girlfriend, Yasmeen, with me. Hello, darling. How are you?
Hi, Nat. How are you?
I am fantastic. All the better for chatting with you today. And I'm really looking forward to sharing your wisdom and experience with our community. And today, we want to be touching on the subject of intuition, because I feel that we have a number of women in our community that are at a time in their life where they can make different choices for themselves. We've gone through the responsibility of, yes, we've been a mother, we've been a wife, we've been support, we've been in a career. We've gone through all the major responsibilities that, we show up as women in our lives. But now we're at this really juicy part of our life where we have all this experience, we have all these skills, and I think a lot of us feel this calling that we want to step into something that either is going to be filling us with passion and with purpose, and something where we can make a contribution, I think is really a big place where we're, like a lot of women, are stepping into that. So, darling, let's talk a little bit about intuition, because I think that all of us have the ability to tap into this if we know how to do that, or, if we're given the right, tools or instructions on how we can sort of tap into that.
Right. So my exposure to intuition started about 9 years ago. And it was when I found out I was clairaudient. And for those of you who might not know what that means, clairaudient is one of the kind of 21 extrasensory intuitive skill sets. So Aristotle actually came up with the 5 senses, which is sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. They're really organ perceptions. And then when I started to get these clairaudient messages, meaning messages from a different time space, I was very curious, about what was happening, what was going on, trying to make sense of that. And so I spent 2 years studying intuition medicine and learning about these 21 extrasensory intuitive skill sets that we all have. Like every single one of us has these intuitive skill sets, but we're sort of programmed not to trust our intuition because for a variety of reasons, like we have privileged our logical left brain over this kind of intuitive, heart-centered knowing. And so oftentimes we even use logic to move away from intuitive choices because we feel like we've used our brain to sort things out, as opposed to starting with intuition and then using our logical mind to kind of complete the task of intuition. Yeah, so it's been quite the journey. And I think intuition for me has helped me so much with discernment, with figuring out how to direct my awareness and attention towards what's serving me, not waste my time with certain people, places, things. And I get audio messages. So literally like, don't take this flight, or you should think about connecting with this person. And then a lot of times I just get visuals. And oftentimes now it's just a full body knowing. It's like, yes, this is right. And this is not right. So, and we could go into, the differences between intuition and things like body trauma, which I think a lot of people confuse and oftentimes don't take any decision because they're so confused.
So I know for me, I'm the same. Like I will get audio message, like it's like a thought. It's not like it's in somebody else's voice. It's like it sounds or feels like it's my voice or my thought, but I know that I'm like, well, I didn't generate that. I don't know where that came from. And not that we need to know. I mean, it could be intuition. It could be a download. It could be a number of different things. But I've had to learn to trust it, because when I don't, I find that life is so much harder for me. And there's been a couple of times where I have, messages have come through and I'm like, no, that can't be right. So, and then I'll find that, I'm working on this children's project at the moment, which is taking a long time to come through. And there has been times where I had a message come through, but I haven't followed through on it because it's not in alignment with what it is that I think is the way things should happen. So how do you stay open to understand, like knowing that what's coming through is something that you should take action on, or if it's just a random thought? Like, how do you figure out?
Yeah. So what I've discovered is if something feels like harsh and loud and almost like there's a violent quality and aggressive quality, then it's like never my intuition. It's just my over analytical, logical mind that's like trying to coerce me or, kind of move me into a direction that's not right for me. So intuition for me the experience has been like a soft, gentle whisper. It's been like a very gentle experience of information that if I don't hold on to it, it can just as easily fly away. So oftentimes that requires a sense of being, and what we learn in our program too, is being incredibly grounded in present time, and then also having a practice of stillness so that you could receive. And so I think we both live in Los Angeles. It's a super crowded place. And we need to, at least for me too, I've had the experience of getting a lot more intuitive insights in places like Northern California or Hawaii or in nature. And so in a really crowded city, I tend to find that I need more time sitting in my own alone time, my own space, and just sitting in a receptive mode where I'm just keeping an open heart and allowing the energy, the information to come in and not judging it. I think that's the most important part, is not to create like a subject-object experience with the information right away. So just sort of get the inspiration. And so, yeah, that's been my experience.
And and you bring up an important point. It's like creating the space for the messages to come through.
Right.
And, for me, I'm sitting out on my balcony, and I've got a cup of tea. I've got a cup of tea. I'm sitting out there, and every morning I have some moments. I'm cold plunging these days. So, that's a good 10 minutes I have in there where I'm, once I've calmed everything down and I'm just in that space of reception. So creating that space every day, I think, is super, super important. And staying quiet long enough to hear the answers, because you can just sit there and go, okay, what have you got for me today? Or you can sit down with an intention of, I need some guidance here. Right. So you can ask a specific question for that to come through as well. Right. And, like we said, trusting is super important. So have you had an experience where something has come through and you haven't taken notice or you haven't taken action on that?
Yeah.
You had an experience where it's, you got, oh, I should have listened to that.
Yeah. So actually on my journey, there were so many moments when I didn't actually listen to my intuition, and like really tragic things started to happen. And so I kind of learned my lesson very early on and no longer ignore my intuition when I hear something, especially if it's repeated. But I spoke about this in my TEDx talk where on my way to Sundance, I called a ride share and I had this feeling in my heart that I shouldn't take it. I heard this message: you have plenty of time. Why are you calling a ride share car right now? And I just decided to take the car and not listen to that piece of information. But I also knew that I needed to ground. The moment I got in the car, I felt the driver was a little bit ungrounded. The energy didn't feel good to me. So I was closing my eyes and meditating, and we're on like heading to SFO. And all of a sudden I hear my driver scream out, "Oh my God." And I open my eyes. And as I'm opening my eyes, I see that we are driving about 70 miles per hour or so into a 4-car pileup on the highway, barreling in. And it was intensely scary. The driver was out, airbags came out, the whole car got smushed, and then another car came in. And so that was for me. I almost risked my life not listening to my intuition. And there's like just countless pieces of wisdom that have come through, mostly just to sort of protect myself physically too. Like that usually is when it comes in pretty strong. But I did hear that message. It was like, "Oh, you got plenty of time. Why would you take a car right now?" But I didn't listen to it. And then I have plenty of data for when I did listen to my intuition and what happened after that too. So
if someone's listening to the podcast right now and they go, "Okay, I don't think I've ever heard my intuition before. I've never, and maybe you have, but you haven't recognized what it is." What are some of the ways that they know, or that they can, yes, we want to be quiet, but what kind of practices can they do? Because there are certain ways that we can really encourage these messages to come through rather than sitting there and going, "Not doing anything, I don't know what's going on."
So Brenda Dunn, who I interviewed on my show, she was I want to say like head of research at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. So she actually studied both intuition and intention for like close to 30 years. She found that intuition is an experience that comes from the heart. So when the heart feels expansive, warm, a sense of connection with the whole, then you're going in the right direction. If it feels contractive, hollow, dark, or even neutral, it feels like that's not the right direction. So just kind of knowing how to discern, those types of experiences physically in the body. And then also remembering not to confuse it with body trauma or some kind of projection, our own projection. So I always ask this question first: is this thought coming in, or is this information coming in? Is it my own projection? And if it's truly not my own projection, then like, let me actually sit with it and feel it. Like, does it feel expansive, or does it feel neutral? Does it feel kind of negative? And if it, again, feels light, then I keep asking, like you said, questions. But there's like small practices you could do throughout the day. So again, grounding is one of the most important practices. And then also ensuring that you're not making anything important or attaching onto an idea of how things should be, because that's where a lot of people get stuck. It's if they have too much importance towards like some kind of agenda, then you're essentially like pouring your energy into like some kind of predictable outcome in which it might not be in your highest interest or in alignment with this universal flow. I think for me, and this is where I think a lot of the conversation or intuition starts and ends, which is, do you believe that consciousness is local, or do you believe it's non-local? And in order for intuition to make sense in my world and my point of view, we have non-local consciousness, which means that our consciousness is not just attached to our physical limited experience, that it's actually attached to some other time-space dimension, which means that time is actually quite malleable and not fixed. And then, that opens up a whole other set of conversations. So you can play with time. So intuition is super interesting because you're getting insights about the highest predictable outcome based on your current energy state. But if you don't like what you see, you can also change it based on your own energy, And so I think that's the cool part about working with intuition. It's like, you're not like just moving down a fixed reality. Like you have full agency over this steering wheel. So it's kind of like being able to surf is the analogy that I like to use. It's like being able to surf these powerful waves and then knowing when to get off, knowing that, okay, it's time to get off and it's time to sit in this reality for a little bit, get information, and then maybe go back out and surf another wave.
So you've mentioned body trauma a couple of times. So what do you mean by that? Is that old events and things held in our body? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah. So intuition simply doesn't work when we have fear about or any kind of opinion or experience. So let's say we have a job interview coming up and we like got a lot of really bad experiences with jobs, in the past, and maybe have gotten fired. And if there's any like amount of fear in the body going into an experience, then you close the valve of non-local consciousness. And I think Penny Pierce has an amazing book called Frequency where she can actually describe this. And I'm not going to do it justice necessarily, but essentially like our energy waves move in these like figure eights. And so what happens is when we get stuck in like a fear or contractive state, the energy around us and in us is not going to flow and move back up. It's just going to get stuck in this kind of, what is like the trough as opposed to the peak. So that's an experience of just like blocking your energy and then projecting out fear. So like just really assessing like old experiences, and the words that I hate people using are like always, never, because it hooks them into a timeline. Oh, this always happens to me. Like, oh, so I work with people also on developing their intuition. And oftentimes they'll say things like, well, this always happened, or I've always done this. Like I experienced this in my childhood. And they're essentially like making that reality, that energy wave, way more dense. So to sort of just pretend like you just came here on Earth for the very first time is an amazing way to really kind of see what information is coming through, having no judgment, having no idea of patterns that happened, but just being open to, I'm just observing this reality and let's see what comes up, is also a great technique.
Yeah, I love that too. And the other thing too is that if you're listening to the podcast, you go, okay, well, this kind of sounds cool, and I could definitely try some of these techniques. This is great. And then, you start to hear some messages coming through or feel, because, it could be that, like Yasmeen was saying, she's clairaudient. So she hears, audient is hearing, clairvisual is the visions, and then clairsentient. That's right. When you're actually feeling like it's like you have a knowing. So be open to different ways that this can come through. And, you also want to be careful about who you share this information with, because it's not always, people don't always understand or, buy into this kind of way of thinking either. Has that been your experience?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, it's been quite the journey. I think because I come from a very linear, logical family and way of thinking, especially living in San Francisco before moving to LA and before that, New York. So when you tell people that you have these intuitive insights, and especially if people don't believe in non-local consciousness, it just sort of goes out the window, and people sort of assign it to something like witchery or, woo-woo mysticism. But I think it's such a shame because there's so much evidence in our history of intuition, and even just, small hunches. Most people have actually had an experience of intuition. I think a lot of people are scared to talk about it because it's not culturally accepted. Although I think the cultural zeitgeist is changing right now, where it's becoming more and more accepted, that people are like, oh yeah, like, of course I had this intuitive insight, or you just know, like, you shouldn't be with this person, or you shouldn't have taken this job. You shouldn't have moved to the city. And people sort of see that later after they made a decision, 10 years out, 20 years out sometimes. And I think that's the piece of the journey where people oftentimes can decide to like be filled with regret or to make a radically new decision. And I think making a new decision is so scary because our human mind likes to control and label and categorize life. And so that when we do that, we have such a limited experience. Like we just sort of limit all the other possibilities. And so I jokingly said, I'm so happy that my life didn't turn out the way I expected, because it's turned out so much better. I didn't, right? Like, it's like, wow, I had no idea that I was going to go into film and go into podcasting and write books. But because at the, 10 years ago, I think my greatest aspiration was to like move to the Bay Area and become an executive, at a company. And that was kind of it. And so I think when we hold on to a reality so tight, we just make our lives a little bit smaller. And that's okay too. I think if you know where you're going and you're happy with that, I think the test to me of a good life is, if everything was taken away from you, would you still have a sense of inner peace and trust in the divine? If, like having no attachments and just realizing that this life is essentially a game and there are rules to the game, and it's a short game, it's a short game.
And we have the ability to influence the game more than we realize, So, if you're at this place in your life, you're like, I don't know what's next for me. I'm like, I know I want to do something different. I want to do something that makes me feel good, and I want to do something that's going to make a contribution, but I don't know what that is. Leaning into this and having those quiet moments. And I also think it's the quality of the questions that we ask, because when you can go, okay, well, you could ask a question like, well, what's next? And not necessarily get the answer. And even any answers that may come through necessarily, well, this is what you're doing for the rest of your life. This is okay. So this is what's presenting now. So lean into this, and then this could lead to somewhere else and could lead to something else. So I think, knowing that we get to influence the game, knowing that any decision we make doesn't mean it's the final decision that we'll make for the rest of our lives, but also realizing, once we realize all those things, like having fun with it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Yes. To me, that's the most magical piece of the puzzle on the journey of life than anything else. Having a sense of humor. And again, going back to the importance thing, whenever we create too much importance, what we do is we push the thing away from us. We say like, this thing is a hierarchy. And so whenever you create a hierarchy, you can't be in the same time space dimension as something in which you create a hierarchy with, at least for the long term. And so humor has a way of dispelling that kind of hierarchy. You're like, oh, there is this divine comedy in life. You know, I jokingly say like the highest form of consciousness is having a sense of humor and then also being able to hold paradox and just realizing everyone's got their own idea of what reality should be. And everyone then looks for confirmation to support their reality. So I also noticed that people's belief about reality is this kind of starting point for how things unfold in their life, right? So if you have this belief that like nothing works out for me and that I'm a destitute and all that kind of stuff, then like you'll find evidence of that on your journey. But if you believe that everything is always in alignment or my life is a celebration, I think also feelings are something to hone, to really practice honing the experience of I am in celebration of life and like seeing what shows up. So it is cool. You can kind of start this path and this journey in so many different ways with your thoughts, with your feelings. You can work with the external world to help you feel a certain way, and then we project it out and the world mirrors it back to us. Like I've often noticed that as well, right? So you say like, I'm a creative person, you're going to always find evidence to support that theory as opposed to someone who's constantly trying to do creative things without any kind of success.
You know, and I've talked a lot in the past about, you know, emotions, thoughts, how that is what's really affecting our frequency. That's the energy, that's the vibration we're sending out into the unified field. And the more that we can hang out in those higher frequency emotions, you know, the gratitude, the happiness, the joy, the pride, the accomplishment, the courage, when we can hang out there as often as we can and for the majority of the time, then we start to be in flow so much easier. So not only are we finding that things are showing up a lot easier and we don't have to hustle and try and force things to happen. Actually, that's the way that things don't happen because we are completely cutting off the flow between us and the universe. So, you know, being in that kind of that flow state all the time and then having these practices of, you know, sitting in quiet, asking these quality questions. And I think the other thing too is also taking action on what's presenting. You know, sometimes something will show up and you're like, ooh, you know, I had this experience that happened a couple of months ago where, you know, my morning routine, I've got up, I'm ready to go to the gym and Bella is barking and I'm like, what's up with you? She's sitting next to the drawer where her lead is. I went, oh, you want to go for a walk? And I'm like, all right. So I could have said, no, I'm going to the gym, but I took her out for a walk because that's what was presenting in the moment. And we're walking like 5 minutes and then she becomes the anchor, you know, and she wants to go back. I'm like, seriously? So we turn around. Now I could have forced her to keep walking, but I'm like, all right. So we turn around. But when I go back, I get back to the gate of my community and there's a woman standing there with a little dog. So we start chatting and then my girlfriend comes over and who knows this woman, and this woman's name's Pepper. Anyway, so now that there's a crew, Bella wants to walk. So I'm like, you know, they go, well, why don't you walk with us? So we walked for a little bit and this woman is doing a whole paper on emotional intelligence. And so she's like, we're starting to collaborate together. And it was just random. Like there's at any time during that experience, I could have gone, no, I want to do this, or no, my plan is to do this. But when I'm open to what's presenting and going, okay, well, let's follow this. Let's pull on this thread and see where this goes. This is also a fantastic practice that you can get into the habit of that's going to really help you to experience some really beautiful, delicious, serendipitous, you know, events coming up in your life. And then this is how you get into flow and this is how you allow those messages to come in. And it helps you to get into that place of trust, you know?
Yes. Trust is a big one because I think a lot of people associate their employer or their job or their partner with a feeling state of safety, security, whatever it is. But if you can actually peel back and say, no, all those things came from this divine intelligence. So that way I don't have to feel dependent on any of this person, this company, this situation, that there's always going to be a flow of abundance coming in. And so life becomes easier. And like you said, this idea of just like attracting things to you as opposed to using willpower to go look for them. And I think there's like our inner world and our external world where, for most of my life, I was constantly trying to, at least in my 20s, I was constantly trying to go figure things out with my mind and use willpower. And in the last 8 years, I mean, everything that I've ever wanted has come to me. And even when I didn't want it, like I said no to my podcast for 6 months before it happened, before I finally said yes. But it was so funny because I was like, wow, looking back, it's like my dream podcast came looking for me, and so many things started looking for me. My business partner for my film, my editor for my book. And it was one thing after the other. So that was a radically different shift in the way to do things in life. It was like, wow, I actually don't have to move myself to go find the things that are meant for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just a way of being. It's a new way of being. And if you're listening to this podcast, I encourage you to lean into that and don't be too attached. Be open to new things coming through. Lean into, and even if you have an idea of maybe a new avenue or a new direction in which you can move, just lean into that. Just start. It doesn't mean that it's going to be your path, but it means it'll be the path that's going to lead to the path that might lead to the path. So, it's always going to lead you to where it is that you go. And if you can be in that place of awareness as well, make sure you have those practices every day. I think that's going to really help you to make the big decisions not seem so big, because it's not like you have to make a decision and that's it. It'll be, well, this is my first step and let's see where this goes. And even that, having that mindset, I think opens you up to some, amazing experiences. So, yeah. Well, darling, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting to you about this. I mean, I love our conversations anyway. The fact that we get to share this with the community is awesome. And I know that anyone that's listening to that, if they start to apply some of these little, practices that we've mentioned today, it just one of these practices could have a really big shift for someone. So I really appreciate you and I love you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your time with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Natalie. It was an absolute pleasure, and I love talking to you any time of the day. So this has been such a joy for me too.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Not Over, Just Different. If you felt inspired by this episode, please subscribe and drop a comment below to let us know what you loved. My goal is to reignite the spark that you may think you've lost and cultivate a space where no matter what walk of life you are, you can step into the world with power and confidence. I would love to hear your reviews. It helps us to reach more incredible women like you. So until next time, keep growing, keep striving, and keep believing in the power of your potential. Here's to living your best life now.